This Week in Radio Tech, episode 198, is brought to you by the Axia X-Node family. Nearly 200 different broadcast devices connect directly to Livewire IP audio. For those that don't, the Axia X-Node is convenient, reliable, and affordable. Minimize wiring and maximize utility by connecting your gear with Axia X-Nodes. On the web at axiaaudio.com/xnodes. Time was when every radio station had a performance studio. Now just a few do, but they use them a lot. Plus, we hear about stage lighting for broadcast engineers. Brett Gilbert, Director of Engineering for Clear Channel Radio in Tulsa, Oklahoma, is our guest. Brett joins Chris Tarr, Tom Ray, and me talking performance studios. Hey, welcome into This Week in Radio Tech. I'm Kirk Harnack, your host, and delighted to be here. This is the show we talk about broadcast engineering, especially radio and audio engineering. And sometimes we talk about some cool stuff that's kind of tangential to the normal day-to-day broadcast engineering. And that's this show. You're going to like it. Joining me today are two of our usual co-hosts from Mukwonago, Wisconsin. Let's go ahead and bring in Chris Tarr, who's sipping coffee and who knows what else. Hey, Chris, how are you?
Actually, I have my Diet Pepsi here. I'm in the performance space at the 88.9 Radio Milwaukee World Headquarters here in downtown Milwaukee in our beautiful big performance space. I am the Director of Operations and Engineering for Radio Milwaukee. I'm also co-founder of the virtual engineer at broadcastengineering.info, staff writer for Radio Guide, and so many more things.
and loving father and husband.
Exactly.
All right, all those things. You live a full life, don't you?
I am the busiest man on the planet.
All right. Well, I really appreciate the broadcastengineering.info, and we'll make sure we promote that again at the end of the show. We don't want people going to it now. We're trying to watch the show, but at the end of the show, let's talk about that just a bit. Also with us, not in a parka, not in a transmitter site that's 32 degrees. But rather in the sunny climes of southern Florida. Welcome, Tom Ray. Tom, have you moved?
No, actually, I'm down here working with a brand new radio station. Gentleman's a friend of the family. I've known him since I'm 3 years old. And he's got a brand new station he's putting on here in North Palm Beach, Florida, WLML 100.3. And I came down to take a look at the transmitter site and take a look at the studio and do a couple of things for him. And anyway, I'm glad I'm not in New York at the moment because my daughter left for school the other morning, or not school, for class, and when she walked out of the dorm way up north, or up near Canada, it was 30 below zero.
30 below?
30 below, and I was sitting here, it was 50. It was great.
Was that the wind chill?
No.
Oh, that was the temperature.
Matter of fact, the lead story on CBS Evening News last night was the town about an hour south of where she is. It was the coldest place in the nation yesterday at minus 37. So
West Palm is looking pretty good right now.
West Palm is actually feeling really great. It's in the mid-60s outside. It's absolutely lovely.
Cool. Well, good deal. All right. Well, hey, let's go ahead and bring in our guest. We have a guest on the show who I met years and years ago in the infamous town of, I guess, Waco, Texas. And he's not there anymore. He's moved up in the world. He's now taken care of a whole cluster of Clear Channel radio stations. Ladies and gentlemen, from Tulsa, Oklahoma, Brett Gilbert. Hello, Brett. How are you?
Hey, how's it going? Actually, we go back a little further than that. I think we first met in Oklahoma City when you brought down I'm trying to remember, was it an Omnia 3 at KTOK?
Oh man, it may have. Yeah, was that an AM station?
Yeah, in Oklahoma City. So that was before I moved down to Waco for a little hiatus down in Texas. But yeah, I'm up here in Tulsa now. We've got 6 stations up here, and it's a nice balmy 20 degrees here today with a wind chill running around 0 degrees or so. So it's a nice warm winter day here in Tulsa.
Wow. It's cold everywhere except where Tom is in West Palm, Florida. Hey, well, our show is brought to you by my friends at the Telos Alliance, and our show specifically today is brought to you by Axia Audio X Nodes. And we're going to have a little story about X Nodes instead of a commercial where I just suggest you go buy some. Brett Gilbert and I are going to tell you about a really good use for X Nodes and for any Axia node to solve a real problem that a lot of radio stations have. So we'll get to that about halfway through the show. So our show is brought to you by Axia Audio and X Nodes, and I thank Axia Audio for sponsoring this week in Radio Tech. Well, we've got a number of subjects to cover today, and I'm excited to cover these. Brett Gilbert has some great insights on not only broadcast engineering, at belt and suspenders, every day, work-a-day broadcast engineering, making things work and keeping them working, especially in a cluster of 6 stations, pretty active. But the thing we're going to really talk about here is the notion of a performance studio. Some radio stations have them. Used to be, I think, a lot more had them. Heck, back in the 30s and 40s, every radio station had production. Had performance studios because that's how they made music, right? That's how they did radio plays and had people come in one after another or one ensemble after another playing music and singing and performing live. We don't see that so much anymore, but stations do still have them. I know the Chris Tarr station in Milwaukee, 88.9 in Milwaukee, has a performance studio. So, Brett, if you would, talk to us about how this performance studio at the Clear Channel cluster in Tulsa, how did this come to be? How did it get included in the plans? And then let's go into talking about the engineering specifics and how you guys use it.
Well, basically, the studio was built because of KMOD for a lot of years had a special feature on Friday mornings called Friday Morning Live, and it was a show based on featuring local artists and performers and giving them a chance to come on each week, and they would get a chance to play 3 or 4 songs. And this started back in the late 80s when Phil and Brent went on the air on KMOD, and a couple of years after they went on the air, they started doing having bands on and having live performances. It was basically a studio or show and studio that was help created by Steve Davis. He was engineering the KMOD at the time and helped create the Friday Morning Live along with Phil and Brent. And at the old building, it was kind of a makeshift studio. They didn't really have a designed studio space, and it required a fair amount of work to make it all come together. But when they moved into the new facility here at 27th and Memorial back in 2001 to 2002, they designed a specific space for Friday Morning Live, and it's a performance studio with a full-blown control room. The facility currently has a Tascam DM4800 digital console in it, and then we also have a 24-track multi-track hard drive recorder that uses a light pipe in and out of the console. And it's a great studio for bands to come in and perform, and it's designed to be used live on air. We have plenty of channels so that we can mic all the instruments, all the vocalists, and it's always been a great way for to interact with the local community and give the station that local feel, and it's an opportunity to showcase local artists. And it's also, as we've used it over the years, the last couple of years, what we've started doing is we've had more live performances with actual guests coming into the studio. Originally, it was designed more as kind of a recording and on-air studio. And about a year or so ago, we transitioned away a little bit from the Friday Morning Live format. And now, in conjunction with some of our other FM stations here in Tulsa, we'll have artists that are in town for a concert or a show. Sometimes they'll stop in after they've set up, and they'll come in and do a little acoustic performance. And it's an opportunity for listeners. We'll put out contests and stuff so that listeners can come in and watch their favorite artists perform in studio, and it gets them closer to the artists, and it's really I always think it's kind of cheesy to use the win-win term, but it's really a win the whole way around because it's good for the listeners, it's good for the artists, and it's good for the station. And another thing is, for especially like for the sales department stuff, we have like studio sponsors and stuff like that. So it works well for everyone.
Huh. It sounds like at Clear Channel, it can also be something that is a money maker if you have sponsored shows and maybe even you have a corporate sponsor for the studio itself.
Yeah, it really can be. Yeah, yeah, it can be. Depending on what sales is able to work out. And one of the things that we were able to do when the station when the studio was first getting put together, of course, some of the equipment purchases were capital purchases, but then other things years ago we had partnered with Guitar Center, and they were a sponsor, so we were able to work with them to help provide some of the equipment. In our particular studio, one of the things that's always difficult for bands to bring in is a drum set, so they were able to provide a drum set to us and some of the microphones and so forth. And that's a huge help for bands is, by and far bringing in the drum kit is one of the biggest pains for a band, just the setup, the equipment, the weight and stuff like that. So when Friday Morning Live was going, it was really convenient because the band could basically just show up with their guitars, their amps, and then everything else was in place. The drums, the microphones, and typically, they could show up, and within 30 minutes we were ready to go on the air.
Brett, Chris Tarr's station, as I mentioned, also has a performance studio. I'd like for you two guys to compare notes about how they're equipped. And Chris just got to equip his brand new since they just built this facility. Yours has been around a while, but maybe you've made some changes. Chris, tell us a bit about your facility, and you two compare notes about the equipment.
Well, as a matter of fact, I'm sitting in it right now. I'll see if I can spin around so you can see it. I'm actually at the back of it. Behind me, the garage doors open up. There's a community space, and off to this side, which is where I'm looking, is a coffee shop, which we lease out to a person. But I'm actually at the very back and sitting at the mixing desk. The equipment is put away. We're doing we're renting it out, or not renting it out. There's a nonprofit that's doing a presentation on Monday with a PowerPoint. So we've taken down most of the equipment, but I'll try to slowly, without making people dizzy here, kind of spin around so you can see what we're doing. So I'm going to get up, and now I'm going to turn around, and you can see behind me is the stage. And I'm going to walk over this way.
How are you holding that mic at the same time as the laptop?
I've got two hands.
To the laptop?
No, I've got two hands. All right, so I'm over here in the corner. Now I'm going to spin around a little bit and turn, and right there is our main on-air studio behind that window. And then we're going to walk down here, and right there is another studio that we've outfitted. It's a production studio, but it's also being set up as a video edit suite for what's going on in here. I'm going to spin around, and right behind me is the stage, and you can see, I'll tilt it down. There it is. I'll spin around this way. You can see all the power outlets and everything in the stage. And then those shades behind me actually are powered, and you can raise and lower them with a switch. And I'll come this way, and you can see from the top of the stage, I'll go up on the stage here, and you can look behind me and kind of get a view of what's going on from the stage. So you can kind of see there the seating and everything behind me.
And I take it on warmer days, you can open the garage doors.
Right. Well, actually, that goes into another space. So typically what we would do is we would open those garage doors up, and there's another several hundred square feet with tables and things. I'm going to walk back over to my table that opens up. And in fact, I'll flip the camera through the window.
So what do you do for a mixing console there? Do you bring it in temporarily, or is it permanently affixed in there?
You can see the seating in the coffee shop there.
Yeah.
The mixing desk is actually a PreSonus, and it's a 32 channel with iPad control. So what happens is our Yes, I'm going to plug back in. Right to my right here is a network jack with an Axia node. And so what we do is we plug in the output and input one of the channels of the Personas into the Axia node. And that way we can feed the audio to put it on the air and also get a return from the studio. So we can go bi-directionally through the Axia network. And then as well, with the Personas with iPad control, when our sound engineer is walking around, he can make tweaks to microphones, instruments, monitors, all that kind of stuff with the iPad remotely controlling the Personas console, which is very nice. So that's, in a nutshell, that's kind of what we do here. We're still working on it. There, you probably saw the big ladder that was there. We're putting in a projector and a screen so that we can do PowerPoint presentations or videos and things like that. We're also working on new lighting and some more sound reinforcement in here. But it's a pretty versatile room, and we use it for the same kind of reasons that that we were just talking about before. We do. We do our live performances in here. We also have, and which we do a lot of them, and almost all of them are on the air. Every week we do a local band, and then we have national artists that come through that are on tour and perform. We do that for our members, and then of course for other nonprofits in the city, they can come in and do it for if they want to have their meetings or conferences or things like that in here. They can do that as well. We've got a really great partnership with the coffee shop next door that has a liquor license, among other things, so they could sell beer and wine and coffee. So it's a really versatile space. And I think, radio is heading in that direction more and more with, having spaces like this. Over at Intercom, when I did their rebuild, they took a conference room and kind of set it up to be two different purposes. It's, they can do their conferences and their meetings in there, but also it can be reconfigured to do live performances. And now with the ability to do with, for example, Axia gear or, the Wheatstone IP net, it's a whole lot easier to run audio in and out and do performances on the air and be a lot more flexible with with where you perform. For example, with Axia here, I've got Axia network jacks all over the building, so we can really do impromptu performances anywhere. We just plug it in and go. We also have in one of our main studios a small performance space as well. So I think that's really where broadcast is going with radio, especially is back into that experience that you're not going to get from a Pandora or anywhere else.
Brett, how does all that compare to what you guys are doing in Tulsa in your performance space?
Well, and he's doing kind of, when you're doing like a performance studio or venue, as we were kind of discussing before the show, you can basically do kind of two different ways. Ours was designed more as a recording studio, so ours is a lot more intimate space. When we set it up for actually bringing people in, we only have room for about 20 to 30 people inside the room. It's a pretty intimate venue for performances because ours was designed more as a recording studio. So it's got a whole lot of soundproofing, sound baffles, and so forth. Because years ago they actually produced a number of CDs with performances from Friday Morning Live, and but what Chris points out is one of the great things about the various consoles out there that are available. For instance, the Persona Studio Live series. Behringer has now come out with their X32, which is just a really awesome console. And there's all the jokes and stuff about the old Behringer equipment, but ever since they bought out Midas, their quality control has just really gone way up in their product offerings. And so there's a lot of opportunities out there as far as equipment for these venues. And one of the things I kind of wish that we had now is like a Personas or an X32 from Behringer, because with the console that we have, a Tascam DM4800, you can't really operate it via an iPad. So in our studio, we have the separate control room where we do all the mixing. Well, when we're doing using the studio in an event where we actually have people in studio, you really need to be on the other side of the wall to mix, so that you can hear not only the sound coming from the band directly, but also what's coming through the reinforcement speakers. And so the equipment has really boosted the capabilities of these studios. I mean, what was somewhat unimaginable 10 years ago is just almost commonplace now as far as features and capabilities.
Well, and that's the tough balance too. I know with our director, drives her nuts that we've got all this equipment sitting out here in the performance space with the mixing console and the desk and everything. Well, why can't we put that in a studio? Well, that's the challenge, is you're not only mixing for on air, but you're mixing for a live room, and you can't really do that if you're not in the room. So, we're doing some things like, I'm flying a snake up and over, and trying to make it as clean as possible. But those are the things that you have to ask yourself when you're designing these facilities. What is the purpose? Now, we don't. Ours is mostly for live events, although we do master and create CDs of this concert series that we do for fund drives for fundraising. But we didn't want to do, and this room is acoustically pretty good. I hired acoustical engineers to come in and help me design the room and tune the acoustics, but it's certainly not a place where you'd come in and typically master a CD, like you guys are doing. But that wasn't the job that we set out to do. And again, when you design rooms like this, those are conversations you have, because there's certainly, you could jump down the rabbit hole, and you could spend a lot of money on things and realize down the road that isn't really what you wanted to do. And the design of this room changed several times when we were building, in the process of working with the architects. It started out more of like an auditorium with acoustical treatment all around. There were no garage doors. It was kind of like, I joked, it was like going to the high school auditorium to see a play. And, after a while, we decided that really we didn't need that. What we needed a place with a little more relaxed atmosphere, because a lot of what we were doing were these impromptu live shows. And, we have this great, and you can see behind me all the light there. That's actually a sidewalk cafe, which is what this building used to be. So there's a big patio out there with speakers that show the radio station, and it's a fairly busy street. And we said, well, if we're having these performances and they're on the air and people walking down the street can hear them through the speakers, let's open up the garage doors and people can watch from the street and see what's going on. And so, we went from, well, we need to have this pristine recording type of session studio to, well, it's really more of just, it's almost like a bar kind of atmosphere. So that does change the design of the facility a little bit. And, what we were just talking about with equipment, I mean, it's become so easy now to integrate all this stuff. And, something a lot of stations really are just starting to kind of figure out. I mean, it used to be where you'd grab an old Mackie and, you'd throw a couple of mics on there, turn up your mics in your studio, and you're good to go. And, things have changed a little bit. And with webcasting and all these other things, we're going to be doing video from in here, televising. So it really is a lot more. It used to be radio. You didn't see it, so it didn't matter. Yeah. And that's not, it's not true anymore. So there's that element to it.
So Brett and Chris, both of you, in your facilities, do you mix separately for the house and for broadcast? Because so many places do mix separately when you have a live broadcast in a place that normally does a house mix. Brett, how do you handle it?
Absolutely, yes. Yeah, in fact, a couple years ago, we did an event. Every year we do a big toy drive for the U.S. Marine Corps for the Toys for Tots. And also in our facility, we've got a big event center located next door. And we had a band playing over there because the morning show was actually in the event center with the Marines doing the Toys for Tots drive. But yet we were also doing the Friday morning live show. And so, as Chris said, you've got to cover both bases. And what we ended up doing, and this is really easy to do, is you put in place a splitter snake. And so we ran two consoles. We had one console in the event center, and then we had another console that was doing the on-air broadcast. And that particular morning, we weren't using the actual recording studio. And so I was mixing in the event center, and then Clark Dixon, who's the assistant chief engineer here, he was mixing the on-air. And so it's real easy when you have, if you truly need to have that dual purpose capability to have two consoles. You can either do a splitter snake, where literally you just have your regular analog channels, And basically, a lot of the ones that I see, the more professional ones, will use like Jensen isolation transformers to isolate both outputs going to the main console and the sub console. Or if you look at some of the more expensive systems like from Avid and Yamaha and stuff, you can do various Ethernet based snakes that can have, upwards of the smaller ones will do up to like 48 digital channels, and basically you're just running data to both consoles. The Behringer X32 system has plug-in modules for the consoles, allowing you to do digital snake and be able to split to two different consoles, and you can have two different operators doing two entirely different things.
I can't hear you, Kirk. I don't know if you're talking.
Yeah, I lost Kirk too.
Oh, there we go.
Oh,
okay.
there we are.
So, Chris, how about you? House mix versus broadcast mix. Can you use the same for both, or definitely got to be two separate functions?
Well, it depends. We would prefer to do two mixes. Here, we don't have the staff to do that. Now, before we moved here, we did all of our performances with our nonprofit partners over at the Pabst Theater, the Riverside Theater in Turner Hall, and they would actually have. We did have a separate mix. I do have a split snake, and we would have their guy would do the house, and our guy did the mix for radio. Now that we've moved here, we don't do that anymore. However, it's a fairly small room, so generally we can mix for radio and be okay. That sounds okay in the room. So, down the road, that's something that we're definitely going to do. I do have two separate consoles and the ability to do a split feed, but we just don't have the staffing to do that now. And in this room, it's fairly small. It's not real tricky, and the capture that we do. The great thing about PreSonus is the capture software. We capture all the tracks in real time, unmixed. So when it comes time to master for recording for the CDs, it doesn't matter anyway because it all gets mixed back down again. So we just send essentially our studio engineer will just mix it for with headphones on for broadcast. It sounds passable in the studio here, and then when it gets on the air, it sounds really good. So, but I would say we would like to do two, and that's really the preferred way to do it.
And I'll jump in here and ask both Brett and Chris. Obviously, every band's different. What's the main difference in the mix that you do between the on-air and the in-house mix?
Well, at least for us, if we're doing the live mix for the venue, when you're in front of a band, you get a lot of just the direct sound off the band. For instance, when we did our Toys for Tots drive, the mix that I ran in our event center had basically vocals, a little bit of the kick drum, and a little bit of guitar. Everything else was out of the mix as far as the snare drum, cymbals. There was very little guitar in the mix. However, the on-air mix contained cymbals, the toms, the snare, the guitars were definitely in front of the mix. Those are things that, when you're there in front of the band, all of that volume from the stage will just carry itself. But, when you're going out over the air, there's none of that there. So you've got to fill that in with miking the drum kit and so forth.
One of the things we find for sure is microphones. For example, when our thing is a performance interview. During the interview segments, you can't push the gain of the microphone up because then you start to get feedback, even when you tune the room to eliminate that. Just by nature, it's perfectly amplified in here, and you can hear the conversation really well, but it gets into the studio, and comparatively speaking, the microphone volume is down here, and the band, when the band starts playing again, it's here. And I found that I had to have a person, basically a board op, even though it's in the studio right here, we can automate the process, writing gain during the interviews because the microphones were too quiet. You almost couldn't hear them on the air. So there are things like that where in the past we could, for example, the house mix, we didn't have to mess with that. And then the person mixing for radio would hear that in his headphones and ride gain as he mixed the microphones for air. So there are a lot of subtle differences. The difference with my room is that it's such a small room. We mic everything anyway, and we can adjust with monitors, and it's not nearly as big of a setup where those things are of a concern. And we do things at these performance halls. That's when the split mixing makes a big difference.
This is a subject that I'm just so clueless about. The whole notion of mixing for a live venue, and you guys have experience with that, and I just don't have any of that. But I guess a kind of a comparable thing in a much larger space. I got to tour at the Grand Ole Opry House here in Nashville, and of course they have some enormous console for the house mix, and they have enormous speakers up overhead, and they're honking out to 4,000 people or however many people are in the audience. The broadcast mix is a whole separate mixer, another enormous mixer, and it's even in a soundproofed room. You really can't hear what's going on anywhere else. So it's just totally isolated. So you're not, that mixer is not influenced by the live sound in the room, and he's making his own mix for the radio, which incidentally he mixes by listening to the off-air broadcast of WSM AM radio live. Isn't that odd? It's kind of like listening to RLX speakers, I guess.
Actually, I think that'd be the way to do it, because that's how the other people are hearing it. Sure. Well, if it doesn't sound good that way, then people listening at home aren't going to like it. So in a lot of ways, it makes some sense to me.
I just thought you'd be fighting the multiband processing there.
Well, yeah, I was going to say, one thing by, listening to an off-air feed and pre-HD, it was something that was easily done, is you could compensate for the processing. And at one time, we actually used to have just a broadcast processor in our control room, and we would occasionally, while it wasn't an off-air feed, at least gave you a little bit of the feel for what might be going out over the air. But we didn't do that for too long, though.
Well, you bring up an interesting point, because that's one of the things we deal with here is we have monitor speakers for the station. And because we're in HD and we have the public coming in and out, you really can't do an off-air signal as our house feed, because it's 8 to 16 seconds delayed, and we have on-air lights and people can see in the windows and things like that. But the one thing we do is we do a live broadcast with a band. We obviously use a profanity delay. Well, what we didn't realize at first, or I didn't think all the way through, is with the house speakers, if we have the doors open and they're playing, then during an interview section, you could hear for 8 seconds what was just playing on the air with the band in the house speakers down, in the hallways, kind of bled in. And so if you're watching the performance, you can kind of hear faintly in the background, 8 seconds delayed, the stuff that was going on. So, now as part of our checklist, I go around and turn down all the house monitors. But there are things like that, doing live performances in a broadcast facility. Those are things you need to think about. That it doesn't occur to you that you have to compensate for. But again, the house monitors are really a big part of that, because we have hallway speakers, and if we were just an insulated, nobody came to visit, and it wasn't the showbiz thing, we could put the off-air feed on there off of a tuner, but we can't do that because of the delay and all these other things. So that is actually a very good point.
Hey, you're watching This Week in Radio Tech. It's our episode 198. We're just 2 more episodes away from a huge one where we will be, I'm sure, talking about war stories. It's our usual every 10th episode thing. Chris Tarr is with us from Milwaukee, Wisconsin today, from 88.9. The studio's there where they have a live performance space. Brett Gilbert is our guest. He's at the studios of Clear Channel in Tulsa, Oklahoma, where he's the director of engineering. And Tom Ray has been checking in from West Palm Beach, Florida. Not his usual venue, but a beautiful one. Yeah, a beautiful one nonetheless. Our show is brought to you by Axia Audio, and this time we're going to talk about the Axia nodes and what you can do with them. Now, if you know anything about Axia, you know that nodes, an Axia node, is a device, a box that converts regular audio, analog or AES audio, into LiveWire format, which goes over Ethernet. And it converts Ethernet LiveWire back into analog. So it's an in-out device for audio sources and destinations that aren't already LiveWire compatible. So now, lots of things are LiveWire compatible, things that you might need, like a Telos telephone hybrid system, or maybe a profanity delay from 25.7, or maybe a satellite receiver from international data casting. A lot of them have a LiveWire jack right on the back of them. Or maybe you have an Omnia audio processor that's got a LiveWire input and output on it, or even a streaming encoder. But for things that don't have LiveWire on them, like a microphone or some non-partner company with Telos or Omnia, maybe you've got a Comrex codec or some other brand of hybrid, or microphones and speakers, or a guitar amp. All these things that you might want to get them in the LiveWire format. You can do that with a node. Now, Brett Gilbert at Tulsa is using a couple of Axia nodes with no console, just a couple of nodes in a rather interesting application, and I think it's got some lightning protection involved with it. Brett, why don't you tell us how you're using two Axia nodes there?
Well, basically, one of the problems I encountered when I got here was originally when this facility was designed, the STL tower for the facility was supposed to sit behind the building, and due to various zoning requirements and stuff, they had to end up moving that to the front of the building. Well, the problem was the original grounding for the facility didn't incorporate the tower being located at the front of the building.
Oh.
Well, one thing that kind of came up after that change in the design was every time the studio tower got hit by lightning was we'd take a fair amount of damage from the strike. So one of the things we did was to protect the STL equipment from or actually kind of isolate the radio TOC from the STL room, was to install a couple of analog line nodes from the TOC up to the STL room. And what we do is we have basically a media converter that takes the 100 megabit, converts it over to gigabit fiber, and then runs up to the front of the building. And then we've got another media converter there that converts it back to copper and into the nodes. And so that transports our RPU receivers, our STL audio going out to the transmitter sites, and even we've got a translator audio, and our studio aux and all that stuff is transported through those two nodes. And basically, there's a special mode in the node called snake mode. And all you have to do is just plug them into each other, put them both in snake mode, and they just start talking.
That's cool. And you know what, Brett, what you're doing there with a couple of Axia nodes, using them as a lightning protection device with fiber, which of course is non-conductive, optical fiber between them. And you said you've got about 100 meters, about 300 feet of run of optical fiber between these two nodes. Of course, what happens here is lightning can hit the tower, and then if there's equipment or copper-connected equipment at the base of the tower or in your STL room, your shack there, that can get conducted back to wherever the nearest ground is, which now is in the back of the building, due to where you had to put the tower. And you can have quite a huge difference in potential there when lightning strikes. And that huge difference in potential is, for just that nanosecond or however long it is, that is what causes components to blow up and wires to blow up and lightning to damage things. If everything bumps together, like the stuff in your STL shack, if all of that is affected by a lightning stroke at the same time, it's much less likely that something's going to blow up. And hey, that optical fiber is just invisible to lightning; it doesn't know it's there. So, did I get the story right? Is that about correct on the theory?
Yeah. Basically, what we did by putting that fiber in is basically we no longer provided a path from the tower to the TOC. Basically, when the strike occurred, everything would stay up at the front of the building where the STL tower is located, and it wouldn't get transported via the copper cables that were going between the STL room and the equipment room. And so it really is, as cut down our issues and stuff. Lightning's funny. You can never completely, eliminate all the things that lightning can do when you can can take a strike, but the nodes have done exactly what they were supposed to do, which is basically keep things from going from the STL tower into the rack room and causing all sorts of chaos in the rack room.
You also eliminate the possibility of ground loops and hums and buzzes. When you run a pair of analog audio cables that far, 300 feet, you might very well have different grounds at each end. So even apart from the lightning protection, you also get ground loop isolation. You get local grounds at each end with a medium in between that doesn't care about ground. This was basically the very first application of any Axia equipment years ago. In fact, it's been 10 years ago. I believe 2004 was the first time any Axia gear was installed somewhere, and in Ashtabula, Ohio, a station had a very similar situation to yours, Brett. They had a tower that was about a couple hundred feet away from the building, and they had been using underground copper trunks, a multi-paired cable between the tower where the STL shack and some satellite receivers were, and the building. And so the tower would get hit by lightning, everything there would bump up in potential, and 5532 ICs and other line drivers connected to the wire, the underground multi-pair cable would blow up, and they were always replacing these things. So they pulled a piece of fiber underneath, put a node at each end, and voila, they have a snake that's pretty much impervious to lightning and certainly no more ground loops. If you want to know more about this, folks, head over to axiaaudio.com/xnodes, plural, xnodes, and you can have a look there at the different kinds of nodes that are offered by Axia. There's AES input and output, analog input and output, microphone in, line level out, and there's a mixed node that has a microphone and some analog and one AES in and out, plus some GPIO. If you need to send contact closures from one place to another, you could do it over your network or over that same piece of fiber. They just GPIO commands just travel right along. Check it out, axiaaudio.com/xnodes. You'll find lots of uses for nodes, including making your own routing switcher. You don't have to get an Axia console. You can just use nodes to make a routing switcher to eliminate all kinds of headaches around your broadcast plant. All right, you are watching or listening to This Week in Radio Tech, episode 198. Brett Gilbert is our guest in Tulsa, Oklahoma. Tom Ray, how about an update from where you are? You haven't talked much. Tell us anything that you've learned or interesting things that you've done or seen there in West Palm.
Well, actually, here in West Palm, it's the weather's been actually pretty decent as opposed to where I'm from, and the station I'm at, actually, it's a brand new station. Like I said, the gentleman I've actually known this guy since I've been 3 years old. He won the license in the latest auction, and they're hoping to have it on the air in about another 2 weeks. So I'm sitting here in the studio right now, and let's see, they're going to be HD. They've got a brand new Harris transmitter. They've got a brand new ERI antenna that's going up today. So
wow. What class or power level is the station? Maybe I missed that if you said it.
Well, it's a Class A, and they're going to be running a unique format that's actually quite suited to the population of the area here. They want to cover Palm Beach and hopefully get down to Boca Raton with their signal. But besides that, they're happy with the Palm Beach area.
Nice.
True local radio.
Yeah. And when you first said, "Hey, this is a brand new radio station going on," I thought, "What? Are they letting out new radio stations?" But you said this was in the last auction. Was this 2-3 years ago?
The auction this was probably an auction from about 2 or 3 years ago. But I mean, he found out he won this thing about 6 months ago.
Ah, okay. So
it's a brand new. I mean, it's a brand new construction permit. It's about 6 months old. The antenna is going on a really cool tower down here. It's a Crown Castle site. The tower itself looks almost like the Eiffel Tower. It's quite a big mother, and there's 1, 2, 3, 4. There's at least 3 Class Bs on there. I think the other one's either a Class A or a Class B. There's a couple of translators and a whole bunch of ham stuff. And the interesting thing, when we were going through the building, I spotted this box on the wall up near the ceiling, and I looked at it, and I said to the guy from who was with the building, I said, "Who's the AM that's on the tower? What are you detuning for?" He goes, "Let me tell you about that. If you look at the tower, there are 2 wires coming down the tower that are insulated from ground. there was an AM whose tower came down during one of the hurricanes. They put up basically a long wire antenna and tuned with that tuning network that's up near the ceiling, and got back on the air after a couple of days rather than being off the air for however long it took to get a tower manufactured and sent down and put up.
Wow.
So it was like, the heck is that? What? I didn't see any AM towers around here. So
just real quick with the studio and the transmitter side construction at this new facility, anything particularly new? Are you trying any new technologies or new equipment you hadn't tried before? Is there anything unusual about this, or is it pretty much run of the mill what you'd expect from a new Class A FM?
It's pretty much standard, standard stuff. I mean, when they go on the air, the STL is going to be a Comrex Access, actually a Comrex Bricklink. They're in the process of getting a frequency coordinated for STL. So, they'll get on the air. They'll be able to do their thing. They've got a heavy web presence. Actually, the station is on the web right now. It's not an on-the-air signal yet. The interesting thing is the programming and such is actually going to come out of Connecticut. I'm talking, the playlist and the music and be sent down here. So they have somebody up in Connecticut who is also going to be voice tracking a shift, and the rest of it's going to be live people, live bodies down here.
Cool. All right. Well, good luck, and give it a good blessing. I hope. If you bless it, the guy's going to be fine.
If I bless it, somebody's going to have to wipe its nose. Oh, never mind.
All right. Hey, let's get back with Brett Gilbert. He's talking about live studio spaces, performance studio space. We got a couple more subjects to move on through here, Brett. We touched a little bit on choice of consoles, and Chris Tarr mentioned a PreSonus console with iPad remote control, so you can walk around and listen for frequency response anomalies, things like that, and take care of them from other places. You don't have to be right there at the console. Brett, you're into this kind of tech a bit yourself, right?
Oh yeah. Personally, I've got a Mackie DL1608 that I use for my personal shows. I do lighting and sound on the weekends and stuff. Before I ever got into radio, I was doing lighting and sound all the way back to when I was in high school and stuff, and I still do that a lot on the side and stuff. So, I wouldn't recommend like the Mackie for necessarily a recording studio or on air use, but it's a good little unit for just straight performance use, but it's pretty much every major manufacturer out there now, whether it be PreSonus, Behringer, Yamaha, they all have some form of an iPad app that allows you to mix audio on the on the console and not be tied to that console. I know some people using the Yamaha LS9, and I believe the ML7 also supports the Yamaha iPad app. So you can, I've got a friend that he literally on some shows, if he doesn't want to run a front of house snake and set his board up in front, he'll leave his Yamaha console on the side of the stage and just mix on his iPad. And it's really nice because you don't have to, especially when you're building out a facility or something. If you really don't think you need to have that console right out there in front, it cuts down on construction costs. You don't have to sit there and worry about getting power and data and a snake, and we all know how expensive cable is these days. So that eliminates a significant run of multi-conductor cable. Of course, you can also go the digital snake route, but that's also an expense as well, because digital snakes, even though they cut down on the cabling, they're not cheap either.
So this notion of an iPad for remote control. So you could be the sound mixer for the event, right? And sitting in the audience next to your buddy. So, oh wait, hang on, I got to bring his drums up a little bit.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, it's really pretty amazing to think that, like on the Behringer console, you're talking 32 channels on an iPad. Now, of course, you have to keep in mind when you look at the iPad interface. And one thing, if for those that are like, how can you do this? Go download the app. The app's free. Virtually every manufacturer out there, go out to the App Store, look for Yamaha, look for Behringer, look for PreSonus. They're all free. It's like so many things. I guess you could say the cost of the license is buying the equipment. So downloading the app, you can demo the app, and pretty much every manufacturer has some kind of way to manage the volume of information. Behringer does it by the channels are broken into groups of 8, and so you tap on the screen as to which group of 8 channels you want to control. On the PreSonus and the Mackie, you scroll the faders left and right. One thing I like about the PreSonus information that Chris could probably elaborate on more, since he uses it a little more than I do, is by rotating the iPad one direction or the other, it changes the interface and changes the amount of details on the channels. And I'll let him chime in on that a little bit.
Well, I actually haven't used it very much. Our studio engineer does. But you're right. You can have 2 different views depending on the orientation. There's a couple other tweaks you can do too with multi-touch that are pretty cool too. So, yeah, I mean, and that's the thing is, all of a sudden now you're not stuck behind the desk. It's not a 2 or 3 person job anymore, especially doing things like sound checks where you're tweaking monitors and microphones and that sort of thing. It just makes things a whole lot easier, and like you were just saying, with Brett was saying, with buying the equipment, generally the software is included, or access to the applications are included in all of that. So it just makes it a lot easier nowadays. Instead of just throwing, and I still have a couple of older manual Mac, the older Mackie mixers, that are analog. But even these newer consoles now have effects built into them. You're not having to buy a bunch of outboard boxes, so they become so much more powerful and actually fairly reasonably, relatively speaking, inexpensive. That if you're a radio station wanting to do this, they're a great value.
Yeah, and one thing. I'm sorry. Go ahead, and then we'll move on to our last subject, Brett.
Okay. Yeah, and one thing I was also going to mention. If you're in the market looking for a console, one thing you might want to consider is looking at the various features they have if you decide to go what I would consider the iPad only control route. And what I mean by that is that you're going to use your iPad as your primary control surface. One thing that some manufacturers do and other ones don't, not all of the digital mixers have 100% digital control, and what I mean by that is on some mixers like Mackie and PreSonus, the input gain control is still an analog control. So like on the Mackie DL1608 and on the Studio Live consoles, you still have an analog gain pot at the top of the channel. So if you're out there, if you lock the console away somewhere where you're not really in front of it all the time, but all of a sudden you realize, the gain's too hot on this channel. Well, now you've got to go back to the console and adjust that. Everything else can be controlled remotely, but that's one thing that you can't. Now, some of the other consoles, as far as like, like Behringer and Yamaha, the channel gain control is actually a digital control that can be controlled remotely, and it can be recalled. And that's another thing about these digital consoles that is just awesome, especially if you have multiple bands, is virtually every digital console has some method of saving scenes or presets. So if you have 2 or 3 bands that are going to perform, you can sound check all these bands early in the day. When one band finishes, you load the next preset, and just go on. There's virtually no sound checking between bands because you've already sound checked everything earlier in the day. It's not like the old days of, where's my notepad? Okay, I need to set channel 2, and get all these settings back to to the way they were during the sound check earlier. It's all digital and it's all saved.
Cool. That is so cool. Hey, Brett, the last thing I want to ask you about, when I met you, and I guess it was in Oklahoma City, you're right, and then you moved on to Waco, not Tulsa. You have for a long time, have had an interest in stage lighting. And I met you, and you had one of these electronic, motorized, gimbal-mounted gizmo lights that have different, different lenses in front of it, or gobo. I don't know what you call them. And there's amazing these lights. You see them at rock concerts and country concerts, and sometimes at modern churches they have them, and they just sweep the audience, and they're just awesome. What are those things, and how do you program those things?
Well, they're automated lights. Of course, a lot of automated lights first started coming about actually way back in the 70s, and actually there were some dating back into the 60s. I want to say that like one of the first ones was, I think, what was it called, the Cyclops or something? It was invented for the Who or something. But the first big round of moving lights that were coming out in the 70s were the Vera lights that went out with Genesis. And over the years now, there's just tons of companies. You've got Vera Light is still one of the premier companies out there, but you've got High-End Systems, which was bought out by Barco. You've got Martin, Clay Packy, Coamar, all these huge companies, Chauvet, Elation, just a lot of companies that are out there today. But yeah, most moving lights, they're basically either based on stepper motors or servo motors. The early moving lights were servo motor based that used some form of a feedback circuit to monitor the position, and then they started switching over to stepper motors because the stepper motors were much more accurate when the digital systems started coming out, because the early automated lights were a lot of them were based on analog designs, and then they went to digital. And it's kind of funny that, kind of like we've been talking about performance studios and things coming full circle, some companies have actually started switching back to using servo motors again, because one of the advantages of servo motors is the high torque that they can produce. And some of the moving lights that are coming out now, PRG is a big lighting company. PRG and Verilight, I believe, are part of the same group now. But they have a moving light called the Bad Boy, which is a huge moving light, and it was used on the U2 tour. And it's such a big, powerful light that they actually started using servo motors again, just to move the large fixture it was. But the cool thing about moving lights and stuff is just the vast capabilities you have as far as the number of colors. And you were talking about gobos. Gobos are the patterns that you can pick and put in the light fixture. You can also do most moving lights will have like some kind of an effects wheel where you can put in a prism, and sometimes they have multi-facet prisms, like a 3-facet or a 5-facet. You've got remote focus, remote zoom. Some fixtures will have two color systems. You'll have like a color system where you can pick custom colors that you put into the fixture. Sometimes that's color correction or ultraviolet filters, and then they'll also have a color mixing system in it where you can mix the colors. And one thing that sometimes people that aren't that familiar with lighting, they'll think, oh, well, color mixing, well, you can get every light out of it or every color out of it if it has color mixing. Well, not necessarily. Color mixing does have its limitations, and that's why a lot of times they'll have what they call a static color wheel, where you can put in those deep indigos or ultraviolet colors that you can't get out of a color mixing system. And the cool thing about it is about the moving lights that are out now is one of the things that we're starting to see is LEDs are starting to make their way into moving lights as well. For a long time, moving lights were using arc lamps as the primary lighting source. Well, as the quality and the output of LEDs has increased over the years. They're now starting to produce quite a few moving lights that are using LEDs, which the nice thing about that is the long life of the LEDs that you can get, because arc lamps tend to, they'll typically, depending on the fixture, the bulb might last 1,000 to 2,000 hours, whereas the LEDs have much longer operational life. But there's also a problem with the LEDs and moving lights that because the LED colors or the LED light source is so cool, one of the things they are trying to resolve is that can cause stuff like fog and stuff to build up in the fixture, whereas when they had a arc lamp, the heat would burn off the fog and stuff like that. So that's one of the things that they're going to work out. Like any technology, you come up with these new concepts, you find some problems, they're going to work those out. But, talking about performance studios, that's definitely something to look at. And we were talking about iPads, is you can control lighting on an iPad now as well. Gosh. There's a company called SynthFX that makes an application called Luminaire. And I literally on the weekends when I'm out doing some road warrior stuff, doing some bands, I control both my lighting and sound system on my iPad, and I just switch between the two apps.
Jeez, talking about multitask. Oh, gee. Brett, I'm sorry to draw this to a close, but we got to go, brother. This has just been very interesting, and we've just scratched the surface of especially the lighting stuff. Can you give us a real quick tip if engineers wanted to learn more about lighting? Is there like a stage lighting for dummies or electronic lighting systems for dummies? Where should people go?
Oh gosh, I should have been thinking about that.
I didn't warn you.
There's some really good magazines and stuff out there. There's like Pro Lighting and Stage News. If you go out to some of the websites out there, like the manufacturers like Chauvet or Elation, Claypaky, Coamar, Martin, some of the lighting console manufacturers such as Flying Pig Systems, or Grand MA Lighting, which makes the Grand MA consoles. Like broadcasters. All these companies put their manuals on their websites. They put their product documentation. Just I highly encourage people just to read up. One thing we did discuss before the show, I would say, like anything, just like broadcast products, you get what you pay for. You definitely want to avoid, some of the really cheap fixtures, because you do get what you pay for, and you certainly don't want to invest a bunch of money in equipment only to replace it later because it's it was really kind of an inferior product. And there's a lot of knockoff equipment out there, and you kind of have to look at the company or the country of origin, and is this something look for reviews online. Is it worth buying? But when you stay with the more reputable manufacturers, you're generally bound to have good success.
Brett, we're definitely going to have you back on the show another time to talk about lighting for a whole show. I think that's going to be a cool thing to do. So I appreciate you very much taking your time to be here today. Ladies and gentlemen, Brett Gilbert, he's the Director of Engineering for the Clear Channel Radio Cluster in Tulsa, Oklahoma. Brett, thanks for being with us. I appreciate you.
Thank you.
All right. Also with us, Tom Ray from West Palm Beach, Florida. Oh, man, I envy you, dude. Have a great day there and give that station your blessing.
I am. I'm down here. I'm about to head out to the transmitter site to see what the tower crew is doing. And anyway, we'll see you all next week, and I'll be Frosty the Snowman again.
I'll look for a full report. All right. And Chris Tarr from Milwaukee at 88.9. Thanks for being with us, buddy. I appreciate you. Well, folks, that's our show brought to you by Axia Audio and the Axia Audio X Nodes. Go to axiaaudio.com/xnodes and look at how you can use X Nodes in your facility, whether it's for a routing switcher or a snake, something to protect you from lightning with a STL shack on the roof. There's all kinds of uses for X Nodes, including getting audio into and out of your Axia console. We'll see you next week, folks, on This Week in Radio Tech. Bye-bye, everybody.